Above the azure sky, the lazy clouds drifted gently with the breeze, filling the entire expanse with an ancient sense of tranquility. Whoosh! A sharp sound of wind cutting through the air suddenly broke the stillness from afar. 10 streaks of light swiftly darted across the sky, and in a flash, they appeared at the horizon. The gale stirred by their speed tore apart the lazy clouds above. It seems no one is following us. Su Huang turned his head to glance behind him. When he didn't see any pursuers, he let out a sigh of relief. Although Mu Chen and the others were powerful, their enemies were too numerous. Even if they went all out and killed, they would have to keep fighting until their hands were numb. Mu Chen nodded and waved his hand to slow their speed. Then, he clenched his palm, and a translucent jade vial appeared in his hand. Inside the vial, the supreme spiritual liquid shimmered with a clear glow, faint waves of pure spiritual energy radiating from it, causing a subtle yet unsettling sensation. This is... Su Huang and the others immediately focused on it, their eyes widening slightly. Supreme spiritual liquid? As they spoke the name, their voices grew warmer. They all knew the immense value of the supreme spiritual liquid. Though it could only be perfectly used by supreme-level experts, it would still offer immense benefits to them at this stage. Mu Chen smiled and nodded, then flicked his finger. 40 drops of supreme spiritual liquid shot out of the jade vial and flew towards Su Huang and the others. Each of you take 10 drops. After the Wood God Temple Ruins expedition, you should be able to use this to push through the spiritual energy tribulation. For us. Su Huang and the others stared at the 10 drops of supreme spiritual liquid hovering in front of them, momentarily stunned. They understood the value of the liquid. These 40 drops might take a first-grade supreme powerhouse an entire year of non-stop refining to create. We're a team. The stronger you are, the better it is for me too, Mu Chen said with a smile. Su Huang and the others exchanged glances, and from their eyes, they could see the excitement. They looked at Mu Chen with grateful expressions and nodded lightly. Thank you. Seeing them accept the supreme spiritual liquid, Mu Chen turned to look at the eagerly waiting Pinner and Lure. He smiled and said, I gained the most benefits in the Spirit Treasury Hall this time, so I've also set aside a share for you. In the Spirit Treasury Hall, Mu Chen had obtained the Spirit Gathering Bowl. Though it was a counterfeit, its value was still immeasurable. Moreover, the bowl still contained some supreme spiritual liquid. Although due to the seal, Mu Chen wasn't sure how much was inside. He suspected it was a considerable amount. In a way, this liquid should also be part of Luo Li and Wen Qingshuan's share. However, the seal couldn't be broken yet, and Mu Chen couldn't divide the liquid. When the seal was eventually broken, by then, perhaps the two women might no longer be by his side. Mu Chen flicked his finger again, and another 40 drops of supreme spiritual liquid flew toward Pinner, Lure, and the others. The 4 girls were taken aback by his generosity, but they didn't immediately accept it. Instead, they looked toward Wen Qingxian, as she was their leader. Take it. It's only right that he offers this. Thankfully, he's not too stingy. Wen Qingxian gave Mu Chen a glance, then nodded at Pinner and the others. Upon hearing this, Pinner and the others smiled brightly and joyfully accepted the supreme spiritual liquid. They looked at Mu Chen and sweetly said, Thank you, Brother Mu Chen. Mu Chen smiled in return, his gaze falling on the jade vial. There were now just over 40 drops of supreme spiritual liquid remaining inside. He sighed inwardly. The more than 100 drops he had painstakingly acquired were now more than half gone. Although he still had the Spirit Gathering Bowl, he couldn't break the seal on it yet, and he didn't dare to ask anyone for help. He understood just how valuable an item like that was to supreme powerhouses. So, where do we go next? When Qingxian asked Mu Chen, the ruins of the Divine Wood Temple were vast, but the number of treasure seekers who had entered was considerable. Mu Chen couldn't help but feel a little regretful. He knew that aside from the Spiritual Treasure Mountain and the Spirit Treasury Hall, there were other areas within the Divine Wood Temple ruins that could be considered treasure zones. However, they had already spent a lot of time at the first 2 places. Despite the regret, Mu Chen remained optimistic. After all, it was impossible for them to claim every benefit. In situations like this, the greatest taboo was excessive greed. We'll head straight to the Wood God Academy next. It's the most important place in the entire Divine Wood Temple. Mu Chun pondered for a moment before raising his gaze toward the distance. I think almost all of the powerful teams are already heading there. This time, the competition will be even fiercer than before. I'll be curious to see who has the ability to snatch treasures from me, when Qingxian said, her phoenix eyes narrowing. There was a fiery intensity in them. Let's go then. Mu Chun smiled. He understood when Qingshuan's personality. This proud girl was as majestic as a phoenix, and no one could ever make her bow her head in submission. With that, he quickly darted forward, like a streak of light, moving as fast as lightning across the sky, resembling a shooting star as he rushed toward the distant Wood God Academy. As Mu Qian and the others made their way toward the most crucial place in the Divine Wood Temple, the Wood God Academy, there was also some commotion in another part of the vast ruins. At the peak of a mountain stood an ancient grand hall, crafted from massive trees and as solid as can be. Inside, the sound of spiritual energy colliding echoed through the air, followed by an overwhelming spiritual energy fluctuation that made the mountain tremble. Around the hall, teams stood at a distance, watching the structure with some fear in their eyes. This hall was the best preserved building in the area, and given its scale, it was clearly a crucial location within the Divine Wood Temple in ancient times. Everyone knew there must be treasures hidden inside. When they first discovered the hall, many teams rushed in, but soon they scrambled out, disheveled and filled with terror. No one had anticipated how dangerous it was inside. Moreover, they discovered a guardian in the hall whose strength rivaled the divine soul tribulation. No team was able to successfully enter until about half a day ago, when a group of about a dozen people, all dressed in crimson robes, arrived. They exuded a chilling aura, and no one dared approach them. Upon arriving, they ignored everyone else and stormed into the hall. Since then, they hadn't emerged, but everyone could sense that they hadn't perished inside. They could feel the violent and bloodthirsty spiritual energy surges coming from the hall. Clearly, fierce battles were raging within. This was astonishing because everyone knew how dangerous the hall was. Yet this mysterious blood-robed squad seemed to be holding their ground. Boom! A deep, ear-piercing thunderclap rang out from inside the hall, followed by the massive doors exploding open. A colossal figure was blasted out, crashing into a mountain peak and causing rocks to tumble, burying most of the figure beneath. Everyone's expression changed drastically when they saw the massive figure. It was the guardian whose strength was comparable to the divine soul tribulation. And now, this guardian had clearly been defeated. The sound of rushing water echoed from within the hall as a blood-red river suddenly surged out, transforming into several figures dressed in blood robes. At the forefront of these figures was a young man, somewhat handsome but with an aura that sent chills down one's spine. His gaze cold, he glanced at the shattered guardian before licking his crimson lips and smiling. It seems there are indeed some treasures in the Divine Wood Temple ruins. As soon as he finished speaking, his expression suddenly shifted, and blood light flickered in the palm of his hand. His eyes narrowed slightly, and a cold, indifferent smile curled at the corner of his lips. This Mu Chun does have some ability. He's actually raided the Spirit Treasury Hall of the Wood Divine Temple. They must be heading straight for the Wood God Academy now, right? Interesting. If we meet, and he obediently hands over all the supreme spiritual liquid to me, perhaps I should spare his life? The young man furrowed his brows, then shook his head, saying, "Forget it. Since he dared to get so close to Luoli, it's better to kill him. Otherwise, if he runs into that guy later, my credit might be stolen. Let's go. To the Wood God Academy. It's time to properly meet that unpleasant fellow." The young man gave a sinister smile, then waved his hand. His figure turned into a streak of bloodlight and shot forward, with the blood-robed squad immediately following him. As they left, the surrounding teams looked toward the Grand Hall. Just as they hesitated on whether to enter and investigate again, they saw cracks suddenly form on the hall's walls, and it collapsed with a thunderous crash, leaving them stunned. The Wood God Academy stood at the highest point of Wood God Mountain. From the outside, one could vaguely see a grand and ancient structure at the very peak of this towering, unimaginable mountain range. It stood there silently, overlooking the land. In ancient times, for the many forces in this region, this was the most dominant location. Chen and his group didn't stop along the way, but even so, as they drew closer to the Wood God Academy, most of the day had already passed. Fortunately, in the Wood God Mountain, there was no clear sunrise or sunset. The dazzling light covered the land at all times, and because of this, the trees had grown in a way that was almost terrifying. Whoosh! Chen and his group descended from a mountain peak, gazing ahead. Shock appeared in their eyes. Far ahead of them stood a towering peak, soaring to the sky. The peak was a full 10,000 zhang high, incredibly steep and impassable. At the very top, an ancient hall, deep azure in color, stood silently. Surrounding it was a vast greenish light ring, thousands of zhang wide, resembling a starry ring. The sight was so breathtaking, it felt like a divine miracle, causing a stir in their hearts. Impressive indeed is the Wood Divine Temple, Chen praised. Even though thousands of years had passed, they could still faintly feel the majesty and power of the Wood Divine Temple from ancient times, lingering in the smallest details, instilling awe. Chen slowly withdrew his gaze and scanned the surroundings. In the distance, flashes of light were streaking towards their direction, eventually landing around the towering peak. Clearly, as time passed, more and more teams had arrived. Chen wasn't surprised. After all, anyone could tell that this ancient hall, located at the very peak of the Wood Divine Temple, was the most important place. Boom! From the peak of the 10,000 zhang high mountain, a bell-like sound, seemingly coming from ancient times, quietly resonated. The sound carried a sense of timelessness, as if it had passed through the vastness of time. This is the Wood God Academy? Su Huang and the others gazed at the ancient hall atop the mountain, then turned to Chen, asking, "Shall we make our move?" "Not yet." Chen slowly shook his head, his gaze fixed on the massive light ring surrounding the ancient hall. He could sense a chilling aura coming from it and whispered, "The Wood God Academy isn't that easy to approach. That light ring is not just for decoration. With just us, we won't be able to break in." Yes, the headquarters of such a force must have powerful defenses. Although the Wood Divine Temple is broken now due to the passage of time, it's not something we can simply barge into with our current strength. Luo Li nodded lightly. When Xuan's beautiful eyes also fixed on the massive light ring, her expression solemn. Seeing the three of them so cautious, Su Huang and the others immediately dismissed any urgency. They knew the strength of Chen and the others, and since even they felt the danger, they naturally didn't dare to act recklessly. Time passed quickly as the three waited. As time moved on, the sound of wind tearing through the air continued, and the vast light and shadow rushed in, eventually descending like locusts upon the mountains and giant trees. The gaze of every team that arrived was focused on the ancient hall atop the towering 10,000 Peaks mountain, their eyes filled with fiery passion and greed, for they knew this was the most important place in the Wood God Temple. Whoosh! Once again, the sound of wind breaking through the air echoed from afar, and another group of people appeared, floating in midair. Chen turned his gaze towards them, then rubbed his nose. The group in question was from the Martial Spiritual Academy, led by a slender figure in a fiery red dress, drawing all attention. In her jade hand was a massive thunder glaive, much larger than her body, reflecting a cold, ominous light. It was Wu Yingying. "We meet again," Wen Qingxian said with a playful smile, looking at Chen. Chen gave a helpless smile. Back at Spiritual Treasure Mountain, Wu Yingying hadn't teamed up with Wang Zhong and the others to deal with him, which had surprised him. Yet, it also made him feel some affection for her. Despite being fiery like a little chili pepper, she wasn't unreasonable. So, when Wu Yingying's playful gaze swept over him, Chen offered her a warm smile in return. Humph! However, Wu Yingying merely scoffed coldly and turned her head, ignoring him. With his warm face met by her cold shoulder, Chen felt a bit awkward, shrugging in self-mockery. Not long after Wu Yingying's team arrived, more and more powerful teams began to appear, some of whose strength even surprised Chen. Clearly, some fortunate teams had gained opportunities within the Wood God Temple ruins, enhancing their overall power. As more teams gathered, Some familiar ones also appeared, including Wang Zhong from the Sacred Spirit Academy and others from the Four Seas Spiritual Academy. Mu Chen focused on Wang Zhong from the Sacred Spirit Academy, his brows furrowing slightly. This guy's strength has increased. When Qingxian also noticed, her surprise evident. It looks like he has refined the spiritual item he obtained at Spiritual Treasure Mountain and used it to push through the Divine Soul Tribulation. Impressive. He's the oldest among the 4 sacred sons of the Sacred Spirit Academy, Mu Chen muttered. Wang Zhong's decisiveness to refine the spiritual item and break through to the Divine Soul Tribulation was certainly impressive. Mu Chen could clearly feel that the fluctuations of spiritual energy around Wang Zhong were much stronger than they had been at Spiritual Treasure Mountain. The faint pressure emanating from him clearly indicated he had reached the first level of Divine Soul Tribulation. Just as Mu Chen noticed Wang Zhong's newfound power, the latter's cold gaze shifted toward him. But Mu Chen simply smiled in response. The first level of Divine Soul Tribulation was indeed strong, but not enough to make him feel fear. It was likely that Wang Zhong had been greatly affected by his previous defeat at Spiritual Treasure Mountain, which drove him to break through at this moment. Mu Chen also guessed that Wang Zhong knew full well that if his strength was still at its current level, he would lose any chance of competing with Mu Chen in future battles. Whoosh! Suddenly, the sound of wind breaking again drew Mu Chen's attention. He turned his head to see a large group of people rushing in like locusts. Their numbers were vast and diverse, yet their collective presence was imposing. The only people capable of gathering so many teams here, apart from the alliance of academies, could only be these guys. When Mu Chen spotted Mou, Qin Feng, and Lu Xiong, he froze for a moment. He noticed something unusual. They were all missing an arm. What happened? Mu Chen exchanged glances with Luo Li and Wen Qingxian, both equally surprised. What had these 3 encountered to end up as one-armed warriors? It seemed that after leaving the Spirit Treasury Hall, these guys had gone off to do something again. Mu Chen's mind stirred slightly. After the confrontation in the Spirit Treasury Hall, Mou should have realized that they were not their opponents. Yet, looking at them now, they didn't seem to fear them at all. There are many strange and unusual things within the Wood Divine Hall ruins. No one can be sure whether they have obtained some kind of opportunity, so it's better to be cautious, Wen Qingxian said. Mu Chen nodded. Wen Qingxian was right. Opportunities don't just come to them. Although Mou and his group were unlucky, who could say they wouldn't have a reversal of fortune? With increasing noise filling the air, suddenly, it sounded as though there was a rush of flowing water. Following that, a thick stench of blood began to spread from an unknown source, filling the surroundings. At the scent of the blood, Luo Li's delicate, porcelain-like face showed a hint of coldness. These guys finally showed up. Mu Chen's black eyes narrowed slightly. He gazed toward the horizon, where a blood river surged forth. The pungent blood scent emanated from there. The blood river, under countless gazes, swept toward a mountain peak and then cascaded down. As the blood light dissipated, several figures in blood robes appeared, bringing with them a chilling aura that spread with the blood scent. Looks like we're not late after all. At the forefront of the dozen blood-robed figures, Xue Tiandu gave a faint smile, but it was filled with a bloodthirsty undertone. He then turned his head, his gaze locking onto Mu Chen and the others. His smile grew even more intense. Mu Chen, Luo Li, we meet again. Mu Chen's eyes narrowed slightly as he stared at Xue Tiandu. Among their enemies, only this guy from the Blood God clan made him truly wary. He understood that a battle with Xue Tiandu was inevitable here. It was absolutely unavoidable. Mu Chen took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping the area. His black eyes turned cold. Among the 6 factions that had appeared here, the Alliance of Academies, Sacred Spirit Academy, and Xue Tiandu's group would undoubtedly take action against them. The Four Seas Spiritual Academy had no enmity with them, but they weren't exactly allies either. As for Wu Ying, Mu Chen couldn't fathom her thoughts. No one knew how she might react if she were angered. It seemed that this time, if they wanted to come out as the biggest winner, it wouldn't be easy. But no matter what, if they wanted Mu Chen to feel afraid, with these guys alone, they probably didn't have that kind of qualification. The young man's eyes gleamed like knives, sharp enough to make one dare not look directly at them. Under the 10,000 Peaks mountain, the wind howled as waves of light shadows continuously swept in from the distance, causing the already chaotic area to become even more disorderly and noisy. Chen and the others were positioned closest to the giant peak, and within this inner circle, only those with powerful strength were qualified to stay. After all, there were too many people here, and if one didn't have enough strength, they would be thrown out immediately. In such a place, even positioning required strength to maintain. Chen's cold eyes were fixed on Xue Tiandu. Compared to Wang Zhong and Mou, it was clear that this guy was the most concealed. He came from the Blood God clan, one of the 4 divine clans of the Western Heaven Realm. Such a race possessed unimaginable depth, and Xue Tiandu's status within the Blood God clan was clearly not something that the previous Blood Xia could compare to. This guy was here for Luoli, and clearly, Chen would never allow him to harm Luoli in the slightest. Facing Chen's sharp gaze, Xue Tiandu only gave a faint smile, his expression cold and chilling, making one shudder. Standing next to Chen, Luoli gripped her Luo God sword tightly. Her eyes, clear as jade, were filled with a coldness. Even she couldn't suppress the murderous intent rising within her toward the Blood God clan members. If it weren't for the current situation, she might have been unable to resist striking and slaying this member of the Blood God clan royal family right here. Boom. As their cold glances met, a deep bell rang once again from the peak of the giant mountain. The sound of the bell reverberated through the heavens and earth, carrying an ancient aura, buzz. Everyone could clearly see that the immense power of the massive halo had weakened significantly in this instant. Go! In the sea of people, someone suddenly shouted with a voice like thunder. Boom! The atmosphere of this world seemed to explode in that moment. Countless teams soared into the air, their powerful spiritual energy enveloping them. They transformed into streaks of light, sweeping toward the towering 10,000 Peaks mountain. Chen's figure also shot forward, with Luoli and Wan Qingxian closely following behind. Su Huang, Pinner, Luer, and the others were not far behind. Everyone knew this was the perfect moment to ascend the mountain, and not a single person hesitated. The sky was filled with light and shadows, and within a dozen breaths, they had reached the halfway point of the mountain. The light and shadows in front of them were already near the summit. Boom! Just as the first figure reached the summit, a deep, rumbling sound came from the enormous halo outside the dark green hall. Countless beams of light then descended like a torrential storm. Bang! 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 The beams, fast as thunder, struck down upon the figures. These beams were not particularly sharp, but anyone they hit, no matter how strong their defenses or how well protected by spiritual artifacts, would be sent flying out, blood spraying like a bird with broken wings falling from the sky. Chen's figure surged upward, passing through the flowing lights. He had already sensed the danger of the beams, but remained calm, seemingly having anticipated this. Whoosh! A beam shot down from the sky, enveloping Chen entirely. Its speed was such that even Luo Li and the others, who were close by, could not intervene in time. Boom! Black lightning, like a thunder dragon, suddenly erupted from Chen's body. The lightning flowed over his skin, making him look like a thunder god, terrifying and powerful. Boom! The beam crashed into Chen's body, causing him to shudder. However, he quickly stepped into the air, charging straight toward the summit. As Chen was enveloped by the beam, Wan Qingxian and Luo Li were also locked onto by other beams. Humph! Wan Qingxian snorted coldly, and brilliant golden light erupted around her. With a swift motion of her hand, a golden war spear appeared. The spear's light swept out, clashing with the beam like a war goddess. Buzz! Luo Li's serene face remained calm as the Luo god's sword in her hand burst forth with fierce sword light, slashing down. Whoosh! Both women charged out of the beams at almost the same time, chasing after Chen. Boom! At the same time, figures from other directions also surged forward. Powerful spiritual energy erupted from their bodies, resisting the incoming beams and continuing toward the summit. Bang! A deep sound echoed through the sky as countless figures were sent retreating, spitting blood. Yet, some powerful individuals broke through the beams. Those with sharp eyes noticed that as more people attempted to ascend the mountain, the beams grew weaker. This realization was both shocking and terrifying. If one were to ascend alone, even a supreme powerhouse would likely be forced to retreat with blood spitting out. Swish! The image of a dragon appeared beneath Mu Chen's feet as he flashed forward, finally reaching the summit. His figure landed on a vast platform, seemingly forged from green wood. Behind him, Luo Li and Wan Qingxian followed closely. After a brief moment, Su Huang and the others arrived in a somewhat disheveled state. Fortunately, they hadn't ascended too quickly. Otherwise, they might not have survived the beam's attacks. Even so, it was a close call, and they nearly got sent flying off the mountain. Whoosh! Once Mu Chen reached the summit, figures began to materialize on the platform, covering it like a dark cloud. However, the number of people here was much fewer than at the base of the mountain. The first wave of defenses from the Wood God Academy had already knocked out at least 80% of the crowd. Mu Chen scanned the surroundings. Blood Tiandu, Wang Zhong, Mou, Wu Yingying, and other top-tier powerhouses had successfully made it to the summit. A deep azure light surged out from within the halo, eventually spreading across the front of the platform, isolating the crowd from the Wood God Academy. Boom! The deep azure light resembled a vast sea of clouds, constantly churning. Eventually, a deep azure thunderbolt appeared within the clouds, streaking across the sky, bringing with it thunderous sounds that shook the heavens and the earth. That is, as the crowd gazed at the deep azure thunder sea, many of their faces changed drastically. It's the divine Wood Gang thunder. Luo Li's delicate face grew somewhat serious. Between heaven and earth, there exist many strange and powerful forces born from the very essence of the world, forces whose power is immeasurable. For example, Mu Chen's Black Divine Thunder, used for cultivating his Thunder God body, and this so-called divine Wood Gang thunder before them. It is said that such thunder can only arise in places where wood energy is extremely abundant. When the wood energy is compressed to its limit, it gives birth to thunderbolts. This gang thunder is exceptionally fierce and invasive, like a worm burrowing into the bones. It invades the body, even causing spiritual energy to explode. It is an extreme nuisance to deal with. Therefore, when the crowd saw this roadblock before them, their expressions grew tense. The Wood God Academy is indeed not easy to enter. Mu Chen also sighed lightly. Behind him, Su Huang and the others wore grim expressions, then bitterly smiled. They had barely passed the first threshold, but now facing this thunder sea, how could they possibly survive? It seemed their journey would end here. Those who wish to enter the academy must cleanse themselves in the thunder sea for 1 incense stick's time. When the azure thunder sea appeared, an ancient and hollow voice echoed across the heavens and earth, as if it came from a distant age. Upon hearing this, many people's expressions changed. So they were required to enter the thunder sea, and they had to endure for an entire incense stick's time? That was practically a death sentence. Mu Chen's expression grew slightly serious. Just as he was about to speak, the ancient and hollow voice sounded again. Anyone who has the identity of a successor will be granted 10 times the duration. Mu Chen's pupils suddenly contracted. 10 times? This damned Wood God temple, this ridiculous successor identity. Was it meant to kill them? Successor? Many people looked confused. They clearly hadn't heard of this so-called successor. At least they felt relieved that it wasn't their turn to suffer. The thunder sea before them was terrifying, but they could still try to hold out for an incense stick's time. If the duration were extended tenfold, even experts at the divine soul tribulation level would be forced to retreat. Whoosh! As the crowd whispered amongst themselves, a beam of light suddenly shot out from the thunder sea, enveloping Mu Chen, whose expression had darkened. Around him, many stared in surprise, including Wang Zhong and Mou, who were momentarily stunned, but soon their eyes gleamed with gloating amusement. Mu Chen ignored their gazes, his face expressionless. Just as he was about to step forward, his expression suddenly shifted because he saw another beam of light shoot out from the thunder sea, heading in a different direction. There, standing calmly in the light, was Xue Tiandu, draped in a blood robe. Mu Chen's pupils contracted once more. Shui Tiandu had also obtained the identity of a successor? So, it wasn't just him. Two beams of light shot out from the azure thunder sea, enveloping both Mu Chen and Shui Tiandu in front of everyone's eyes. Both of them are successors? Surprised voices immediately rose from the platform. They didn't know much about this so-called successor, but from the literal meaning, it seemed like some kind of opportunity. However, it was hard to believe that only the two of them had received it. They glanced at the azure thunder sea before them. The azure lightning roared like a dragon, releasing an overwhelming pressure. These two had seized an opportunity, but it seemed that to take such an opportunity, one had to risk their life. Luoli and Wenqing Xian, standing next to Mu Chen, also exchanged surprised glances. Clearly, they hadn't expected this guy, Shui Tiandu, to obtain the so-called successor identity, just like Mu Chen. Heh, I didn't expect you to obtain the successor identity as well? Shui Tiandu turned his head and glanced at Mu Chen, a cold smile spreading across his handsome face. But are you sure you can withstand this opportunity? You'd better not die in there. Mu Chen chuckled and said. Blood Tiandu smiled and nodded. Boom. As the two exchanged smiles, their murderous intent quietly surged. The thunderous sound of a violent storm once again echoed from the green thunder sea, as if urging them forward. Mu Chen took a deep breath, a trace of solemnity flashing in his eyes. Without any hesitation, he tapped the ground with his toes, and his figure shot forward like a streak of light, moving as fast as lightning into the green thunder sea. At the same time, Blood Tiandu transformed into a beam of bloodlight and violently charged into the thunder sea, showing no signs of fear. Boom, boom. As Mu Chen plunged into the thunder sea, the blue clouds above churned violently. A massive blue lightning bolt, like a giant serpent, tore through the clouds with extreme force, slashing through the sky with incredible speed, striking Mu Chen's body. Bang! Mu Chen's body was immediately sent flying over 100 feet, black lightning flashing around him. However, the lightning now seemed somewhat erratic. If one looked closely through the flashes, they could see a charred black mark on his chest, with even the flesh slightly blurred. Impressive. Mu Chen's face was serious. His Thunder God body had been cultivated to the level of the 5-rune Thunder body. Even a peak-level spiritual energy tribulation expert's full strike might not be able to harm his physical body. Yet, now, a single bolt of blue lightning had caused him injury. This so-called divine Wood Gang Thunder was indeed as tyrannical as rumored. Mu Chen's palms slowly clenched, and the black lightning surged wildly. The 5 lightning runes on his chest flickered. He had pushed his Thunder God body to its limits. Facing the current situation, even though his physique was powerful, he dared not be careless. Boom. As Mu Chen endured a bolt of blue lightning with his physical body, not far away, Blood Tiandu's body was surrounded by bloodlight. He slapped his palm forward, transforming it into a bloody giant hand, which collided fiercely with the oncoming blue lightning. A huge sound reverberated, the bloody hand shattered, and Blood Tiandu was forced to retreat several dozen feet, his gaze flickering slightly. Outside the Thunder Sea, countless people watched this scene, secretly astonished. Both of these individuals were clearly not ordinary, with one daring to physically resist the divine Wood Gang Thunder, and the other using spiritual energy to fight back fiercely. Their strength was enough to make anyone wary. Let's start too. Luoli looked at Wenqing Xian and said. Wenqing Xian nodded, then turned to Pinner and Luer, saying, "You two stay here. No need to go any further." This Thunder Sea was extremely ferocious. Even experts at the peak of spiritual energy tribulation would find it difficult to cross. Right now, it would be a stretch for Pinner and Luer to make it through. Pinner and Luer nodded in agreement. Let's go. Luoli and Wenqing Xuan's bodies moved, swiftly flying out, and finally charged into the green-colored Thunder Sea. Whoosh! Behind them, several figures shot up into the air. These individuals radiated powerful waves of spiritual energy, clearly strong, and they seemed confident that they could withstand the Thunder Sea for the duration of one incense stick's time. Wang Zhong, Wu Yingying, and others also rushed into the Thunder Sea. They clearly had significant confidence in their own strength. Boom. As more and more figures entered, the entire green thunder sea erupted into chaos. Strikes of blue lightning shot out from the sea, like lightning bolts, crashing into the bodies of the incoming individuals. Boom. Deep, continuous explosions rang out. Those who had previously radiated overwhelming spiritual energy were now suffering greatly, their formidable spiritual energy shattered by the lightning, and the strikes sent them flying hundreds of feet. Many were vomiting blood, their faces pale with shock. It was only after personally experiencing the divine wood gang thunder that they realized how difficult it was to last for an entire incense stick's time in this place. Outside the thunder sea, those who had yet to enter watched the scene. Their initial eager thoughts quickly dampened. Though they were tempted by the treasures, their lives were more important. The deafening roar of violent thunder constantly rang in Mu Chen's ears. As he scanned his surroundings, the thunder sea had become somewhat chaotic. However, in the area he was in, within 1,000 zhong, no one dared to approach. It seemed they were all afraid that his so-called unfortunate heir status would bring misfortune upon them. Boom. Another bolt of azure lightning shot out from the clouds like a giant serpent, crashing violently into Mu Chen's body. Mu Chen was once again knocked back, blood flowing down his arm. The intense pain made his brow twitch slightly, but his handsome face remained expressionless. He turned his head, gazing in another direction where the bloodlight was spreading. There, Blood Tiandu, relying on his powerful spiritual energy, managed to block each strike of the azure lightning. Although Blood Tiandu was also knocked back by each strike, he appeared much better off than Mu Chen. After all, he bore no visible injuries, while Mu Chen's blood was flowing, looking rather grim. Mu Chen seems to be in a bit of trouble, said Pinner in a low voice, watching the scene. Su Huang shook his head slightly and said, Mu Chen is strong in his physical body, while Blood Tiandu is strong in spiritual energy. On the surface, the latter naturally seems to have the upper hand. If he tried to take on the strikes like Mu Chen, he'd probably have been reduced to a bloody mess by now. As they spoke, the thunder sea suddenly became more violent, the azure lightning flashing wildly. With the increasing fury of the lightning, some people soon couldn't hold on and were blasted out of the thunder sea, spitting blood as they landed in a sorry state, their bodies charred black. Their tragic appearance sent chills down many people's spines, especially when they realized that among those blasted out was a person who had reached the spiritual energy tribulation level. Even experts with such power couldn't withstand more than a single incense stick's worth of time. It was unimaginable how domineering the divine wood gang thunder here truly was. Time passed quickly amid the thunderous roars, but for those in the thunder sea, every second felt like an eternity. Mu Chen stood above the cloud sea, azure lightning continuously streaking across the sky and crashing violently into his body, forcing him to stagger back. His body was charred, as if the skin had been blasted open and blood oozed from his pores. But the intense heat evaporated it into a thin layer of blood mist. Phew! Mu Chen's breath had become slightly ragged compared to at the beginning, as he realized that even with his 5-rune thunder body, he was struggling to withstand the divine wood gang thunder's onslaught. Although part of this was due to not using his spiritual power defense, he had already fully activated his thunder god body. Mu Chen glanced into the distance. There, the blood light spread like a halo, protecting Blood Tiandu within. That guy also had quite a few tricks up his sleeve. A single incense stick's time should be nearly up, Mu Chen muttered to himself. As he spoke, the surrounding thunder sea suddenly became quieter. Then everyone saw light radiating from the other side of the thunder sea, enveloping the figures within it. The pull of the light gathered them, transporting them to the opposite side of the thunder sea. Clearly, these people had successfully passed the trial. However, there were fewer than 100 of them. As they emerged from the thunder sea, most of the people let out a relieved sigh. Some were on the verge of collapse, grateful that the time was up. Had they continued, they likely wouldn't have been able to hold on much longer. Boom! As they exited the thunder sea, a more violent thunderclap erupted within. Everyone turned their gaze to it, their faces changing as they saw the thunder sea now filled with azure light, with bolts of lightning flickering in the clouds, resembling azure dragons, releasing a fierce and oppressive force. At this moment, only two figures remained in the thunder sea, Mu-chan and Blood Tiandu. Everyone could sense that the violent energy within the thunder sea was now even more terrifying than before. Luo Li and Wen Qingxuan's faces grew slightly tense, while Wang Zhong, Mou, and others watched with glee. The thunder sea, at this moment, seems to have only just begun to truly reveal its grandeur. However, only two individuals are fortunate enough to experience this sensation. Whether it's a blessing or a curse, no one knows.